New York and on the new Hot 97 app. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Ebro in the morning. Laura Stiles is here. Rosenberg.
Hi.
What's going on?
Wrestling.
Wrestling T. Rosenberg. And introduce us to this guy. Who's this guy?
Lewis House. He has a
Lewis
book-
House. Give it
Yeah,
up.
give it
for
up.
Lewis House.
And especially because he just waited for us to get our studio right for 48 minutes.
Yeah, man.
He has a new book, The Mask of Masculinity.
Can I see that?
Yes, you can.
No.
And you are an athlete,
Former athlete, yeah.
a former football player turned handball player.
Whoa.
Decathlete.
Whoa.
Not the type of handball you're thinking about.
Whoa. Hey. That was my joke. Professional handball player.
It's team handball, so it's a European type of sport. It's an Olympic sport. Handball in Brooklyn is a different sport.
I was gonna say, let's go out here to West Fourth. I want
You
to see
probably
what
whooped my ass.
No, I suck. I was gonna get DJ enough. Like in the courts around here, these guys get it in. But
Yeah.
I would love to see you out there. Do you ever play out in the streets?
It's
in
a
New York,
different sport now.
how different- so
it's like
Yeah,
water
how
polo
different is
without
it?
water.
Got it. It's
It's
throwing
like
a ball
teams-
into a net.
Yes, you have two teams. You're like dribbling a ball.
I
you're
have
passing.
seen this. It's like a mix of basketball, soccer,
Exactly.
and
like lacrosse. Yeah,
and
exactly.
Actually, sounds like a fun game.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
So, can you tell us in a nutshell the theme of this book you've written?
Yeah, for many years, I was driven by anger, resentment, and frustration. Anytime I was triggered, anytime in sports that I felt someone was attacking me physically or trying to hurt me, it was like I had to defend myself. And I couldn't turn the switch off outside of sports. So I would try to defend myself at all times. When I was playing pickup basketball at a no-stakes game, I would just get into fights.
Oh, you're one of those guys.
Yeah, I was like a sore loser and don't
Oh,
step to me, all that stuff,
Oh,
right?
no.
And you're a big guy. How tall?
Yeah, I'm 6'4", 235, yeah. And, also in my relationships with family, with intimate partners, business eventually, it was like a win-lose game in life. There was never let's all try to find a place where we can win. It was like I had to win, I had to be right, everyone else had to lose, and they had to be wrong.
Sound like Donald Trump.
Kind of, right? I wasn't as arrogant, but I had a big ego for sure.
Yeah.
And it worked in a lot of ways. It got me big results. It got me the results I wanted in sports, in business.
It worked bigly. If you
There you
It
go,
worked
bigly.
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 Everyone was into it. All right.
And, when I transitioned out of football, I got injured. I was sleeping on my sister's couch for about a year and a half after that because I didn't know what to do. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be driven by making a lot of money because now I need something else. And so it worked. I made millions of dollars within a few years.
How'd you do that? Let's start there.
I started building an online marketing business, originally through LinkedIn, actually, which is I no longer use, but I started using LinkedIn, teaching people about it, teaching them other stuff on social media, and then it kind of grew from there.
Wow.
And built it into a multi-million-dollar business. Yeah, but I was broke for a couple years, and I said, okay, I'm going to figure out how to make as much money as possible, and it worked. I made a lot of money, but that's all I focused on, and I gained 60 pounds, and I never slept, and I didn't have good relationships, and I treated people like crap, and I was like, okay, this energy of this kind of masculinity that thought I was supposed to live worked in sports, worked in business, but it wasn't working in relationships, and I always felt like I was lonely inside, and I felt this weight on my shoulders, kind of this suffering that I can never kind of kick. I was just like, well, I guess this is just how you live life. I guess this is the way it is. And so I wanted to dive in deeper. 4.5 years ago, I opened up about being raped and sexually abused by a man when I was 5.
Damn.
And for 25 years, I didn't tell a soul because
Literally a soul?
no one knew. Because I was, well, first off, embarrassed, scared, ashamed, resentful, angry. And I just didn't think anyone would accept me if they knew that had happened to me. And as I started to open up about this process, I personally felt like this weight off my shoulders.
Wow.
Like this sense of first terror that people weren't going to like me anymore or whatever the fear was. And then a sense of a weight off my shoulders because people started to say, man, I've been judging you for a long time, but I actually trust you now. I trust you.
You showed a vulnerability.
Exactly. I trust
Yeah,
you.
that's
Like,
how it works.
I'll follow you anywhere.
That's how it works.
Men were opening up to me saying, I've been married for 25 years. My wife doesn't know. This happened to me when I was 7 or whatever. So many men started telling me stories about their sexual abuse or about other things they were ashamed of that they never told anyone. Wow.
Well, real quick, as you were on your way to getting to this conversation with people that you knew and loved, was it was it something that weighed on you blatantly? Like while you were angry and miserable, how far away was the sexual abuse in your mind?
It was
it
kind of
right
like
there?
that nagging thing, like just constantly like tapping on my heart. But it wasn't like pulling me down every day like you need to tell someone. It was more like I just want to forget that
But
thing.
did you feel like you were overcompensating for that, and that's where the behavior
I mean,
came?
that and everything else. I was in
Yeah.
special needs classes. I was dyslexic, so I couldn't read aloud, and it was really hard for me to comprehend.
So it's
in
built up
school.
anger.
Just everything. Yeah, I was the
Yeah.
youngest of 4, and my parents were divorcing, and all the stuff that a lot of us go through.
yeah.
Just kind of like my brother was in prison for 4.5 years when I was 8, so none of the neighborhood kids could hang out with me because their parents
Damn.
were
You
like
were the trouble family.
I was like, it was just like a constantly like building up of things where it was me against the world. I had to prove everyone wrong. I had to get bigger, faster, stronger so that people would accept me. And I didn't want to show my flaws because it seemed like everything that was happening, they didn't want to hang out with me. They made fun of me. So again, and I think a lot of us have experienced something like this.
That's
Right? We've
Right.
all got our own story where we've built up walls or put on masks or whatever it is we want to call it. And it's conditioned us in a habit and a routine over the years.
But socially, I would say, especially in America, the idea of masculinity and this hyper male ego and this tough guy thing and men don't cry and man up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is also programmed into the fabric of what we are as Americans. Even we saw an ad yesterday of the governor of Missouri.
Who's
who
that, Eric?
I forget his name. He just
Oh,
won.
no,
Eric
this-
Wright.
He's a Navy SEAL.
Eric Greitens. I had him on my show. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's just like gun-toting,
yeah.
like, "Ga, we'll fire on whatever problems we have." And it's like, whoa, buddy.
Yeah.
Like, you're in government. We're supposed to, or at least I thought, intellectually, we were supposed to be a little bit, have higher standards where
Yeah.
every answer wasn't violence and every, problem wasn't met with, if you don't like it, here's my AK-47, suck it.
And
You know what I mean?
And
Like-
you see in the media this year, everything besides natural disasters has been the Vegas killings.
Yeah.
A man that doesn't know how to express himself. So let me unleash killing again everyone and shoot myself. You see sexual violence and sexual abuse in Hollywood happening.
Yep.
You see domestic violence with athletes all the time in the news.
You see the president,
see
I
president
grab
every-
locker room talk, grab a
Every
woman's
single
vagina.
day, right? You see the racial marches in Charlottesville. It's just like it's all angry men
Mm-hmm.
who don't know how to express themselves in another way because they're afraid. They're afraid to reveal their fears. So we lead with anger when we don't know how to lead with love.
I guess unpacking this box, right? Like, I guess we're lucky because we have this microphone. So, I've been on doing this almost 30 years now. You've been doing it, I don't know how long.
20.
Laura, you're 21, so you just started doing
Yeah,
this.
she's brand
you know
new.
what I mean?
Brand new, like a baby out of the womb.
But you do understand that we have the luxury of opening up the phone lines and people sharing stories, or us bringing stories on and people in their cars not feeling alone because they hear someone else going through something, and hopefully they either are learning from us and our everyday life experiences, or guests that we have, right? But when you get into unpacking it, you also start to discover that even in people's spirituality, in religion, this hyper male, masculine, men don't do this, are supposed to behave like this thing is reinforced. It's reinforced in our gender roles, right? It's reinforced in the toys that we buy boys versus the toys that we buy girls, right? Like,
Right.
it's on every turn. So how in your book are you helping kind of, I guess, confront that and unpack that for me?
Yeah, by identifying the different masks that men wear, have been inclined to wear. For me, that was the athlete mask, the aggressive mask, the sexual mask, the things that
Ebro, you got a few of these masks.
The sexual mask.
Well, maybe not. I don't know about your sexual
The
mask.
athlete
Let's leave it
mask.
alone.
I'm a broken
athlete.
schlub.
Everybody has their own mask.
Yeah, you got.
though.
We all have
Everybody has.
masks.
I'm
Yeah.
just trying to have those. I don't know if I
No,
have
the
those.
athlete, aggressive, gruff guy. Your gruff guy.
I'm
thing is a
aggressive.
big.
I'm
that's
aggressive.
a big cover up because we all know that.
But what was your
I'm
first
super
step?
brotion. We wrote a song about
Oh,
it,
God.
but
wrote
that's
a-
pulling. That was pulling
Right.
the mask off.
Right.
Duck.
Exactly. Exactly.
But
sorry,
wait,
go ahead, Laura.
what was your first step? Because I think the hardest
Yeah.
part for a lot of people is not even knowing who to open up to first.
Yeah, it was. I didn't know who to open up to. There was no hotline when I was
Right.
5 that said, "Okay, we've been raped by a man. Here's who to call." My parents. I didn't know I could tell my parents or my
Who
family
was the man?
members.
Let's take us through the
It
story.
was. I was going to the babysitters after kindergarten, after school, And the babysitter was great, but she had a son who was 17 and took advantage of me and took me to the bathroom, and the rest is history.
How often was this happening?
It happened once. And but once is enough.
And of course. And after it happened, obviously you're only 5 years old. Do you?
I just
how
remember
did it only
being-
happen once? Like, were you able to?
Good question. I don't know. I mean, maybe
So it could have been worse. It could have.
It could have. I'm sure he could have kept going, and I probably wouldn't have been able to stop it because I really knew something was off, but I didn't know what was happening at the same time. And there was a lot of manipulation and just different stuff that he was saying, and I was just like, "What is?" I didn't know what was really happening.
You're 5.
Yeah. But it took me. Here's the thing: a lot of us don't really open up about these things whenever we feel like it. It took me a catalyst. I got in a really bad fight. I was going through a toxic relationship. I just ended a business relationship that went south. So a lot of things in my life were going wrong. Even though I had made lots of money, I had, had all this success on the outside, on the inside, I was like, why am I so unhappy? Why am I suffering? Why am I so aggressive getting into these fights? Why do I constantly need to react when someone steps to me or says something negative about me? Why do I have to defend myself constantly? And it wasn't until I got in this fight where I was just like, wow, I could really lose everything by, this guy in the hospital right now. Now listen, I gave myself the cover up that he hit me first, so it was okay to do whatever I wanted. But
did he hit you first?
he did hit me first.
Oh,
yeah,
it's okay
yeah.
to do whatever you want.
But still, it's like,
Not really. Not
No,
if
but
you
you
kill
knew-
a guy.
but
like,
really
if
you
well, yeah, you gotta know.
You
what
knew
it's
that
about.
didn't
But
justify.
I couldn't control my rage. It was just like I was looking for a fight.
Yeah,
you're walking down the street.
yeah.
What are you looking at? You
That's
know what I
not
mean?
cool.
And so when
You had
someone-
already beat him and you kept beating him.
I didn't. Oh yes.
That's
Well,
the
not only
problem.
that, but while he may have seemingly been the aggressor,
I was
you,
instigating.
You were naturally
Absolutely.
the
No,
aggressor.
I mean, we were both aggressive, but I mean, and it was in a basketball game. It was like a no-stakes basketball game in the mean streets of West Hollywood.
Yeah.
It's like, come on.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Exactly.
that's not-
Yeah. So for me, I just realized like, wow, I could have lost so much here. The police station's right across the street.
Yeah.
These guys, maybe they got a knife. I don't know. Like they could have done something worse to me. Who knows what could have happened? And I could have lost my reputation. What if this is online? My business would suffer. I was just like, okay, I need some support. I just turned 30. I was like, something's wrong with me. I feel like I'm a fun-loving guy. Like I'm always a fun-loving guy. But in those moments, like I'm so triggered, I couldn't control myself. So I got therapists, I got coaches, I went to emotional intelligence workshops, I tried it all. And it was in one of these workshops where we went through so much from like our past and our parents and childhood. And the facilitator of this workshop said, okay, we're moving towards our future and a bigger vision for our life. We've talked about everything from our past, and now we're going towards what we want to create in the world. So if there's anything you haven't said, now's the time, or forever hold your peace. And I was like, okay, I talked about my parents going through divorce, my brother being in prison, feeling stupid as a kid, getting picked on. What about that time I was raped? And I was like, why have I never talked about this? And so I stood up and walked to the front of the room and walked them through the entire story. Like moment by moment, the smell, the taste, the feel, everything. And then I went and sat down. I couldn't look at anyone in the eyes. This was the thing I remember. I couldn't look anyone in the eyes when I told them because I was so embarrassed and humiliated. And I went and sat down, and it was like the first time that I erupted with tears in like the longest time. And it was just like I've been holding on to this aggression, I think, this pain, I guess. And
About to erupt in tears right now.
and I finally was allowed to share it. Thankfully, I had that experience. Here's the thing. I don't think I would have ever talked about it if I didn't have all this support and people really standing for me and saying, hey, we want to support you. And that's a challenge. I don't think a lot of guys who grew up like me, there is a safe space to talk about just anything they've gone through, any of the fears.
When you say like me,
Just like, I grew up in the Midwest where you're told not to cry, not to show emotion. I played sports, and in the locker room, if you were sensitive at all, they called you any type of name you want to think of that's less than a man.
you never saw your dad cry?
I did see my dad cry. This is the thing. My dad actually was pretty sensitive. He would cry like in movies or in vulnerable moments. But my peers, it was not acceptable. So it was like my dad, I could see it, but then if I tried to show that emotion ever, it's like I'm shoved in the locker or whatever. It's like you're just made fun of at school.
You never talk? Did your dad because my dad was much more aggressive and gruff and fighting and going to prison and felonies, the whole thing.
Yeah.
but was also very hug me, love me. It's cool to cry. Men really cry. Like, it's fine. Like, you know, was both of those, and still had that conversation with me. So growing up, I never found it problematic or felt like somebody could now best me physically because I could cry, right? Like, that's what it always came down. You know, for guys, that's what it came down to, right? Like, if you can't whoop me, it doesn't matter what you think of me. That's kind of how I was raised, right? So I guess I kind of had that reinforcement.
He would cry, but he would never say that it's okay to cry. He never told me that. So even though I saw it,
You needed that reinforcement.
I guess. I don't know. I mean, it was just
Because
constantly.
some people don't, right? Like I can barely picture my dad crying ever, and I certainly don't have any problems being emotional.
Yeah.
So it's just every person's different, right?
I remember like the day my brother got out of prison, we would go visit him every single weekend, drive 2.5 hours in Ohio in the prison there. And
What did your brother do by that? How did he end up in
sold
jail?
LSD to an undercover cop, and
That's
he
the
was
worst.
he was like he was an 18-year-old that he's actually the world's most famous jazz violinist, the #1 jazz violinist in the world now. And he went to the prison and was in the all prison band, and they taught him hip hop, blues, gospel. He was a classically trained. It's a whole other story, another topic.
Okay, that's another good book.
But
you guys got some stories in this.
Yeah,
family,
what the
guys.
hell was going on?
When he got out of prison, my whole family is like, celebrating, and then there's like this tears when my brother kind of had a come to Jesus moment where he's like, I failed the family, I'm so sorry. He's bawling, he's crying, he's like, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to make it up to you, to make sure that I always make our name proud and not like shameful anymore. And he has, but everyone in the family, parents, siblings are all crying, and I wasn't able to cry. And I'm 12 at this time, but I just felt like I had to have it all together. Like it wasn't cool, even though they were all doing it in that moment. I just felt like, no, I just can't do it. I don't know. Just like,
Didn't feel it.
I mean, I felt it, but it was like I felt like I had to be cool
And
or
it's
something.
that original damage from that moment when the 17-year-old took you in a bat, and you had to just be like,
yeah. Well, I just needed to protect myself from that on out, from anything, whatever, any attacks at all.
yeah.
Isn't it interesting that humans feel like, looking back, you obviously realize that the idea of anyone looking down on or blaming a 5-year-old is something that no one would ever, your family would never have done, I'm sure. But that's not how our brain works.
Yeah.
Your brain is like, must protect, must not tell anyone.
Yeah.
Even though if your mom and dad had found out, they would have done everything they could to protect you and help you, right?
I'm sure that guy would have been destroyed by my dad, whatever,
Right.
Who knows what would have happened, but yeah. It was just, I didn't feel like I could, and I didn't know, no one gave me permission. No one was like, hey, if anything ever happens to you, you can always talk to us. My parents, where they were working 3 jobs each, there was 4 of us, they had us young, my brother when they were 18 or 19, so they never really got to just relax. It was constantly like stressful, which is why their relationship, fell apart, and so many other things. Both my 3 older siblings all attempted to commit suicide at one point.
Jeez.
My brother went to prison for 4.5 years. He was only selling weed as like a prison, as a college like musician. He was just like a musician that would do weed or whatever every once in a while.
You just sell a little bit of weed, so you got some free weed.
So
You know what I'm saying? It balances
and
out.
so one guy was like, "Hey, can you give me LSD?" And he was like, "No, I can't. All I do is like a little bit of weed here and there." And then he said, "We'll make a lot of money, this and that." And so he said, "Okay, let me ask my guy who I get weed from." And he was able to get it, and that was all part of the undercover thing. So the one time they got him for that, and like everyone involved was part of it. In Ohio back in the early 90s, the judge wanted to make an example of the war on drugs. And so they were like 6 to 25 years. And he got out in 4.5 years on good behavior. So just for like that one instance.
Wow.
Yeah.
Listen, the book, Lewis Howes, The Mask of Masculinity, How Men Can Embrace Vulnerability, Create Strong Relationships, and Live Their Fullest Lives. This is on shelves now.
It's out, yeah.
What's the response been?
Mind-blowing. Because as I started to open up about, my sexual abuse, it's been the most, talked about topic that I've ever done.
And even beyond the sexual abuse, remember you got, we were making jokes. There's a whole song that he wrote about me called Ebrotional, because I cry. Like I cry on the air, I cry with my daughter, I complain, I rant. I had a whole rant about nobody cares about how men feel that was all over the internet.
Wow.
Because I was like, nobody cares. And when a man comes home and you're like, nobody wants to hear what a man goes through. And our society, women have their groups, and it's cool to get together in a group. And on the cover of all the magazines, how to deal with on the cover of the men's magazine, it's like abs.
It's
You
right.
know what I'm saying? It's like, get it together, you fucking loser. You know what I'm saying? It's what the men's
is true.
magazines
Well,
are.
I'm so glad to hear that that's stuff that you talk about too, and that's what you've embraced, because I've been saying this for years now, that women always get together and talk about their fears and insecurities pretty much every day.
Right.
But when you see guys like forming together, like, you know, looking into each other's eyes, talking about our fears and
Yo,
insecurities.
shut the fuck up, bro. What are you talking
Being a
about,
bitch,
man?
yeah.
But you know what I found? I found that in this last few weeks. Follow me here. This is a little interesting, but the Harvey Weinstein thing has been so shattering that to me it's made me think about the way we talk about everything. Like every time I hug a woman or say a compliment or do it's made me rethink all those things. Within that, if you then keep going past that, is sort of then these gender roles, right?
Yes.
Because attached to the way we talk about women is also the way we talk about ourselves, and how the second you say that, I did it even. Like I remember when you brought up that topic about no one listens to men. And I'm a pretty sensitive dude, and my gut reaction was, shut the fuck up. We don't have the right to complain, blah, blah. And the irony is, to your point, sure, it's funny to make fun of men and go, stop being a little bitch. Women have it worse. They do in many ways. But the fact that we ignore these feelings by men only ends up with terrible repercussions, like abusing women and doing these terrible things.
Or, you know, just that men die younger than women is a fact. You know, men have more heart attacks, men have more disease, more all these things, because we're literally building this up within ourselves. When we're not able to express it in a healthy way, it has to come out with beating our wives, with hitting our kids, with just lashing out on people. Because if we don't know how to communicate with love, we have to communicate some other way. That's it.
Wow. Good stuff, man. Really interesting conversation.
Appreciate it.
Yo, pick up the book, guys. Lewis, it was a great time talking
Thank
to
you
you
so
and
much.
meeting you, man. And keep us the last book you had, The School of Greatness.
Yeah.
I noticed that you started this book referencing that book's success.
Yeah.
And kind of hadn't unpacked this part yet.
Yeah. For me, you know, again, my last book was a big hit, and it achieved all these, you know, financial goals.
What was it about, the last one?
It was about the 8 principles of greatness. I've got a show called The School of Greatness where I interview.
Just being awesome, you know, just being awesome.
Oh, yeah, by the way, he
everything.
has a very popular podcast if
Yeah.
people want to hear more of the stuff that you do.
Yeah, I'm interviewing, you know, great leaders, athletes, you know, all the people in the world who I think are doing amazing things. So it's uncovering those 8 principles of all the great people and how they got there. And I achieved great results with the book, but I was still so unhappy, and I was suffering, and I was like, why am I not getting the feeling that I want? And because I wasn't fully addressing all this stuff. I wasn't releasing a lot of the things, or just talking about it. So I knew this was, you know, the next thing I had to do, because there's so much pain that men are feeling inside. And I get it that women have it way worse. And listen, as a white man, people are like, you know, white male privilege, you have nothing to say, this and that. Like, you have everything easy. And I'm like, I get that it may look like that on the outside, but if I don't know how to internalize things, I'm going to suffer still on the inside.
Well, I was going to make the joke. If a, you know, white 6'4", handsome, rich man is miserable, imagine what everyone else is going through. You're like in the like each group you're in, like tall, everything you could have to be on top of the world, really. And you
and
keep.
if I can't find happiness within, then
like you've been handed the tools in theory to get easy happiness.
but the emotional tools are the most important thing. And if we don't know how to handle our inner world, then the outer world is going to be a prison.
Good stuff.
Bars.
Bars, kids.
Lewis Howes, man. Thank
Thanks,
you so
man.
much. Thank you, man.